AK-9 German Shepherd, third generation working bloodline. Trained to track, to guard, to rescue. I didn't grow up on a porch with kids pulling at my ears, or a yard with squirrels to chase. I was raised on command and routine. The whistle meant go. The silence meant stay. I knew what explosives smelled like before I knew what a sunset was. I knew how to take down a man, how to find a missing child in the snow. But I didn't know what love was. Not until I met Walter. He didn't choose me. Not exactly. He came to the training facility looking for an old, retired dog. Someone calm. Simple. Quiet. But when he passed my cage, he stopped. Just for a few seconds. Long enough for me to look into his eyes and recognize something there. Grief, maybe, or weariness. Or just that hollow kind of quiet that says you've outlived too many people you loved. I walked to the gate. I didn't bark. I didn't pace. I just stood still and looked at him. Scout, he said softly. That wasn't my name, but it might as well have been. I think you've been waiting for me, he added. And that was that. He took me home. But home wasn't a house. It wasn't even a roof. It was the way he opened the truck door and waited for me to climb in like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was the smell of old pine and brewed coffee, and the steady sound of typing in the evenings while I lay at his feet. It was our silence, a companionable, knowing quiet that filled the space between his sighs and my breath. Walter was a man of few words, but he spoke to me like I was the only soul left in the world worth talking to. Scout, he'd say, sipping coffee out of a chipped mug, his hands trembling just a little with the early stages of Parkinson's. People don't really know what lonely is until they get old. But you make me forget I'm even aging. I didn't know what Parkinson's was. I just knew his hands shook. So I leaned into them, gave them something to steady. When he couldn't sleep, I stayed up, watching the window, listening to owls and night wind, waiting for his breathing to slow. When he dreamed, badly, I'd rest my head against his chest until the past let go of him. We had 3 seasons like that. Summer walks along the creek, fall days stacking wood, long winter nights by the fire, his hand on my back, my heartbeat keeping time with his. Then one spring morning, he stood by the door with his old army backpack, and that look in his eyes, the kind people get when they've made up their mind about something big. I think it's time for an adventure, he said. Haven't seen the ocean in decades, Scout. Not since before. He trailed off, didn't need to finish. The plan was simple. A ferry out to a string of coastal islands. Then some hiking, some camping. Just a quiet trip before his legs gave out for good. He called it our last great road trip. He packed everything with care. His meds, some old photographs, cans of beef stew, extra water. He packed a blanket for me, 2, and my favorite collar, the leather one, the one that made me feel like more than just a dog. We drove for hours. Pine trees gave way to open air. The coast opened like a breath. The ferry was old, maybe older than him. A few other passengers, some kids, a couple on a honeymoon, a man with a guitar, boarded with us. Walter found a bench near the edge. I stood at his feet, wind pulling at my ears. The taste of salt thick in the air. Something in my chest tightened. My instincts began to twitch. He didn't notice. He was telling a story. Something about a battlefield, a lost friend, a promise to come back and see the world, not just fight in it. I stayed alert. The clouds came quick. One moment it was all blue sky and laughter. The next it was a sheet of dark wool pulling tight over the boat. The smell of rain hit fast. I growled, low, quiet. No one heard. The boat lurched. A muffled bang came from below deck. The engine groaned. Smoke. People shouted. The deck tipped. I caught one last glimpse of Walter, searching the crowd, eyes wide. Scout, he called. His voice broke over the wind. A beam crashed between us. Wood splintered. The smoke grew thick. Someone screamed. I didn't hesitate. I leapt, cold, deeper than bone. The ocean swallowed everything. The boat, the people, the noise. I swam, not to survive, to reach, to find ground. The island was jagged rock, wet moss, trees clinging to cliffs like prayers. I pulled myself ashore, legs shaking, chest heaving. And that was when I knew I had lost him. You woke to the sound of nothing. The crash and roar of the ocean were gone now, dulled by thick trees and the hush of moss-covered ground. You blinked against the salt in your eyes, the sting of seawater in your nose. Every limb ached. Your paws were raw from dragging across jagged rock. Your side throbbed, bruised, maybe cracked, but none of it mattered. You were alive, and Walter wasn't here. You stood slowly, your body heavy as if the weight of his absence had sunk into your bones. The sky above was still clouded, a dull gray pressing down on the tops of spruce and fir trees that lined the rocky coast. The air smelled of wet bark, seaweed, and something else, distance. You paced the beach first, nose to the sand. You found driftwood, feathers, torn bits of rope, and the scattered scent trails of gulls and crabs. But not Walter. You barked once, short and sharp. Waited. Nothing. No echo, no answer. Just a breeze, rustling the branches like a whisper you couldn't quite catch. The forest call behind you, dark, dense, full of shadows. You didn't want to go in, but you also couldn't stay. So you walked. The ground was slick and uneven. Fallen logs lay like bones across the undergrowth. Ferns brushed your legs. Thorns tugged at your fur. Every step deeper made the sky feel farther away. But you kept moving. Because if Walter had survived, and you believed he had, you had to. He would be looking for you. And if he wasn't here on the shore, then maybe, just maybe, he'd found his way inland. Maybe he'd done what he always did in hard times. Walked forward one step at a time. You sniffed every tree trunk. You listened for the sound of boots on underbrush. You followed broken twigs, disturbed earth, anything that might have been a trace of him. But you found nothing. Days passed, or maybe only one. Time was different here. The sun moved in and out of clouds, never quite setting, never quite rising. You slept curled beneath low-hanging branches, body shivering against the cold. You dreamed of the couch back home, the firewood crackling, the way Walter's hand rested on your head, without even thinking. Your belly shrank. Hunger clawed at your ribs. You learned to chew through bark, dig for roots. You chased a rabbit once. Failed. Chased again, missed again. But you learned. You had to. On the third night, it rained. Not a soft, spring drizzle, but hard, punishing kind of rain that flattened leaves and turned trails to mud. You took shelter in a hollowed log, chest heaving, eyes wide. Every boom of thunder made you flinch. You weren't afraid of storms, not normally. But without Walter, the world felt bigger, meaner, louder. You were a trained dog, a service animal, a rescuer. But here, alone in the wild, you were just flesh and instinct. And you were breaking. You didn't know when you started limping. Maybe it was that fall near the ravine, or the jump over a slick patch of stone. Your left hind leg throbbed with every step. You carried most of your weight forward now. Your back hunched slightly, ears always flicking to check for danger. You were becoming something different. Not Scout the canine. Not Walter's dog. Just something trying to survive. And then you heard it. A bark, sharp, short, not far. You froze. Another bark. This one echoed. Then silence. Then rustling. Your hackles rose. A shape appeared between two trees. A dog. Smaller than you, leaner, with thick fur mottled in shades of brown and cream. A mix, you guess, maybe husky and border collie. His eyes were bright, alert and very much aware of you. You stood still. So, did he? For a moment, neither of you moved. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. Not threatening. Just curious. You didn't growl. You didn't bark. You simply nodded your head once. A quiet canine gesture of respect. He returned it. And just like that, you weren't alone anymore. He led you to a place you never would have found on your own, a small ridge near a stream, where berry bushes grew wild and water flowed clear and cold. There was a hollow beneath an overhanging rock, dry and sheltered. He made a den there, built from leaves and scavenged cloth. He had no collar, no name tag, no human scent on him. He was wild, or had become wild, but he shared his space. You drank until your throat stopped burning. Ate berries, even though they were sour. curled near him that night and slept for the first time, without dreaming of water or wind or that terrible silence on the boat. The next morning, you woke to him nudging your shoulder gently, ears perked. He sniffed the air, then looked west. You understood. He moved like someone who knew this forest, not by map, but by memory. You followed, and though he never told you his name, dogs like us don't need names. You called him Birch, because that was the tree that shaded the stream where you first found hope again. Birch knew the forest. You could tell by the way he walked. Head low, eyes always scanning, his body loose but focused. He didn't just react to danger. He sensed it before it arrived. He would stop without warning, ears rotating, nose twitching, waiting for the shift in wind, the hush in bird song, the ripple of leaves too quiet for anything human to hear. Then he'd veer left or press his body low, or just wait, like he'd learned that patience could be the difference between life and a trap. You followed. You, once trained to lead and command, were now the one learning again, how to read the land without maps, how to drink from a stream without alerting a predator, how to hear the subtle difference between the crack of a twig under a deer's hoof versus a cougar's paw. It wasn't easy. Your legs still ached. The limp was worse some days, especially when the rain came in, soaking the ground and chilling your joints. Birch would slow down when he noticed, wait for you to catch up, nudge your flank with his nose as if to say, "It's okay. We're not in a hurry. Not yet." You didn't talk, not with words. But in the quiet between breaths and steps, a bond formed. Not the same kind of bond you had with Walter. No, but something primal. Sibling-like. He had been alone, too. And now neither of you was. Birch never led you back toward the shore. You realized, after a while, that he knew you weren't looking to escape the forest. You were searching for someone inside it. Walter. Even the thought of his name brought a tightness to your chest. You imagined him back in town, maybe waiting at the docks, maybe calling shelters, maybe thinking you had died. But Walter wasn't the kind of man who gave up. He had been a soldier. He had lost people. He knew grief, but he also knew hope. And somewhere deep inside, you believed he was out there searching for you too. Meanwhile, Walter spent the first night after the storm in a Red Cross tent on the mainland. He had been pulled from the water by a Coast Guard vessel, coughing up seawater, screaming your name until they sedated him. The medics told him to rest, but he refused. He waited at the ferry dock for 2 days. He handed out photos of you, one with your head out the truck window, ears flapping in the wind. "Name Scout," he told people. K9 trained. Smart. Real smart. If he's out there, he's surviving. When no one called, when no shelter reported a found dog, when no locals had seen you, something hardened in Walter. On the 5th morning, he walked into a hardware store and bought maps, rope, a compass, and a waterproof pack. Then he walked into the ranger station and said simply, "I need a permit for backcountry access. I'm going into the woods." The ranger tried to talk him out of it. "That's deep wilderness, sir. Steep terrain. Predators. You're not young." Walter looked him square in the eye. "Scouts out there. And if I don't go, no one will." That was that. The same forest that you had learned to endure, Walter now entered. Alone, with only your photograph and a trail of belief. He was slower, of course. His knees weren't what they used to be. But he moved with purpose, stopping every few feet to study the ground, to check for signs. A broken twig, a paw print, anything. He hung photos of you on trees at intersections, with words written in big, black marker. Lost K9, answers to Scout, belongs to veteran. If you see him, call Ranger Station. But phones didn't work in the deep woods. There were no towers, no cell service. Still, he left the notes. Because hope, like scent, travels farther than we think. Back with Birch, you found new patterns to your days. You scavenged together. You slept near each other, and when danger came, you fought it side by side. A coyote pack once circled you near the base of a ravine. Young, lean, and desperate, they watched you for hours. Birch stayed low and still. You mirrored him. It became a standoff, instinct versus instinct. In the end, the coyotes wandered off, sensing you weren't prey. Another night, You stumbled onto a human campsite, abandoned but recent. Birch recoiled from the scent of gasoline and plastic. You pressed your nose to every object, heart racing. For a moment you caught it. Faint but real. Walter, his scent, his sweat, the oil from his boots. He had been there. Maybe a day, maybe two. Your whole body trembled. You howled, not just a bark, a full-bodied, aching, hollow-throated cry that rose into the canopy and shook birds from their nests. Birch watched you. He didn't stop you. He just sat beside you and let you call. Then he stood, walked a few paces west. Look back. That was all it took. You followed. That night, you didn't sleep. You lay awake beneath a fir tree, ears perked, eyes wide, heart thumping, because something had changed. You weren't just surviving anymore. You were hunting for hope. And maybe, just maybe, Walter was hunting too. You move faster now, not recklessly, not like prey, but with intent, like a compass needle realigned. Birch felt it too. He matched your pace, loping beside you with quiet energy, glancing your way every so often as if checking. Are you sure? And each time you were, Walter had been close. His scent wasn't just old sweat or vague human trace. It was fresh, faint oil from the leather of his boots, that familiar blend of pine and soap and paper that clung to his jackets. You'd memorize that smell during long winters curled beside him. You'd know it anywhere. The forest grew steeper, the trees older and wider. Roots knotted across narrow trails, and thick moss coated the rocks like a second skin. Light broke through the branches in streaks, gold and dappled, softening the harsh edges of wildness. But underneath the beauty, the danger remained. The wild didn't care who you were looking for. You and Birch reached a ravine by dusk, a low-cut canyon carved by a hidden stream, its edges sharp, the drop sudden. A fallen tree had formed a natural bridge across, too narrow for mistakes. The bark was damp, slippery. Birch hesitated. You didn't. You stepped onto the log, placing each paw with care, tail stiff, eyes focused on the other side. Halfway across, the wind picked up. Your hind leg trembled. The old injury from the crash hadn't fully healed. Pain flared. You paused. Behind you, Birch barked once, not out of fear, but as a steadying sound. I'm here. You took one more step, then another, and then you were across. Birch followed, graceful as a shadow. On the other side, you found a clearing, flat ground. Birch sniffed and circled, then froze. His ears perked. You moved beside him and lowered your head. There, in the dirt, were boot prints. Walter, your nose brushed the edge of one, and you inhaled as if it were air after drowning. The scent made your chest ache. He'd been here. Not long ago. You scanned the trees, willing him to appear. But all that came with silence. Still, it meant he was alive. Walking, searching, just like you. Walter, for his part, was 2 ridges away. His body ached, knees stiff, shoulders sore from carrying the pack. He'd twisted his ankle the day before, and it throbbed with every step. But he didn't slow down. Not anymore. Not since he found a few strands of black fur snagged on low brush. Fur like yours. Scout, he whispered to himself. You're out here. You're damn well out here. He stopped at a bend in the trail that looked down over a stream and sank onto a boulder. Pulled out a canteen. His hands trembled too much to unscrew the cap, so he set it down and breathed. 3 years ago, his doctors told him to stop hiking. Said his Parkinson's would worsen. Said isolation was risky at his age. They didn't understand. He hadn't come out here despite the risk. He came because of it, because you had been his anchor, his reason to rise each morning. And now he had to be yours. That night, he built a small fire in a hollow beneath overhanging rocks, just enough to keep the cold at bay. He pulled out your photograph and looked at it in the flickering light. You remember that winter storm, Scout? He murmured. The one where the power went out, and we spent 2 days wrapped in that ugly green quilt? You didn't leave my side once. He swallowed hard. Well, now it's my turn. Back in the forest, you and Birch made camp too, if you could call it that. You found a sheltered nook under a rock face, carpeted with dry pine needles. Birch curled into a ball, his tail over his nose. You lay beside him, but didn't close your eyes. Your ears strained toward the trees. Then you heard it, a sound you hadn't heard since the ferry. Soft, cracking, rhythmic. A fire. Not wild, not storm-driven. A controlled burn. Human. You stood. Birch lifted his head. He saw the way your body shifted, alert, tense, focused. You didn't need to explain. He got up, and together you followed the faint scent of smoke. You traveled slowly, careful not to alert whatever or whoever had made the fire. It might not be Walter. It could be a hunter. Or worse. But your heart knew. You dipped through low brush and climbed a short rise. As you neared the ridge, you paused and sniffed the wind. And froze. His scent, closer than ever. You crept forward, ears forward, breath shallow. The ridge opened into a small hollow. Down below, a campfire glowed faintly. Beside it, huddled under a worn green blanket, sat a man with white stubble and tired eyes. Walter, you whimpered. Just a soft, choked sound, not from your throat, but from someplace deeper. A part of you that had stayed quiet for too long. His head turned sharply. Scout, you didn't wait. You ran. Down the hill, through the brush, across the fire's glow, straight into his chest. He dropped his mug, opened his arms, and you crashed into them. He laughed, loud and broken, as tears ran down his face. His hands clutched your neck, your shoulders, your ears, like he didn't believe you were real. I knew it, he whispered. I knew you'd find me. You pressed your head against his ribs. Your body trembled. His heart beat under your ear. And in that moment, in the deep of the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, you were home. You didn't want to sleep. Even after the fire burned down to embers, after Walter's voice had softened into that gentle hush he used when reading out loud or saying grace under his breath, you stayed alert. Your body trembled not from cold, but from something else, a kind of disbelief. Maybe you had found him. You were back in his arms. But some small part of you feared that if you closed your eyes, the forest might take him away again. Walter, for his part, never let go of you for long. Even as he sat against the rocks, bundled in his frayed jacket, he kept one hand on your shoulder or your head, fingers tracing your fur like he was memorizing you all over again. I kept telling myself you'd survive, he said quietly. You've always been stronger than me. You didn't know how to tell him that he'd kept you alive, not the other way around, that his voice in your memory had been your fire through cold nights, that his scent, faint on tree bark and old footprints, had been the thread that stitched your will to live back together. Behind you, Birch sat silently, his eyes steady on Walter. He hadn't come close yet, but he hadn't left either. You turned once, gave a small chuff. Walter looked at him. That your friend? He asked. You gave a low, short wag of your tail. Walter nodded slowly. Looked smart, like he's seen some things. He reached for a bit of jerky from his pack and tossed it toward Birch, underhanded. It landed a few feet away. Birch didn't move. Fair enough, Walter murmured. Takes time. He lay back then, using his pack as a pillow. I don't think I have many more nights like this left in me, he added, half laughing. Guess you brought me farther than I expected. Oh boy. You rested your head on his chest and felt the familiar rhythm of his breath. Slow, tired, but steady. You finally closed your eyes. You woke to the scent of blood. Faint but real. Not Walter's. Not yours. Wild. Your ears perked. Birch was already standing, his body low to the ground, tail stiff. He looked toward the trees. The forest was too quiet. Walter stirred behind you. Scout, he whispered. You growled low, not at him, but toward what the dark was hiding. Something moved. You caught a flash of yellow in the underbrush. Eyes, too low to be a deer, too smooth to be a raccoon. Cougar. The smell hit you in full now. Musky, predatory, mixed with the sharp tang of meat. It had fed recently. But hunger wasn't always the reason wild things attacked. Territory, instinct, curiosity, any could be enough. Birch gave a single bark, sharp and warning. Walter tried to sit up. What is it? You stepped in front of him. The cougar stepped into the clearing. It was lean, powerful, its muscles coiled like wet rope under tawny fur. It looked from Birch to you, eyes settling on the old man behind you. Maybe it saw weakness. Maybe it sensed the slow breath, the trembling limbs. You didn't give it time to decide. You barked, loud and deep, the way you had during training when signaling danger. You stepped forward, making yourself larger, teeth bared. Birch followed your lead. He flanked the cougar's left side, his body taut and still. The cougar growled, a sound that vibrated through the ground. Then it moved, a low, cautious step forward. You lunged first, not to attack, to drive it back. Your bark became a roar, your legs pushing off the earth with power you didn't know you still had. You snapped at the air in front of the cougar's face, just close enough to show you meant it. The cougar reared back. Birch seized a moment, darting in to nip at its flank. The cougar spun, confused for a moment, and then lashed out. Its paw caught you in the side. You hit the ground hard. Pain exploded in your ribs. But you scrambled up before it could press the advantage. The cougar turned toward Walter. That's when instinct became something else. You moved faster than pain allowed. You didn't think. You didn't plan. You launched. Your jaws found the cougar's shoulder. You bit down hard, felt the muscle flex. It screamed, a shriek that cracked the air. It twisted, trying to shake you off. Claws scraped across your back. Heat and wetness bloomed in your fur. But you didn't let go. Birch darted in again, this time going for the rear leg. A tug, a snap. The cougar panicked. It turned and fled. You collapsed. Walter was there in seconds, his hands on your face, your neck. Scout, stay with me. You blinked slowly. The pain was everywhere now. Deep, sharp. Your breath came in gasps. I've got you, he whispered, voice trembling. I've got you. You heard a whistle. Not Walter's. Birch had sprinted off. Now he returned, and behind him, two figures. Rescuers. Backpacked. Orange vests. They had heard the fight. The campfire. The noise. You didn't understand the words, but you knew the tone. Help. Urgency. You were lifted, placed on something soft. A blanket. A board. Walter rode with you, his hand on your chest. Birch beside him, never blinking. The forest faded. The next time you opened your eyes, the ceiling above was white. Clean smells. Bleach. Saline. Vet clinic. Walter sat beside the cot, asleep, his hand resting on your back. Birch was curled near your feet. You tried to move and winced. Your side was stitched, your leg wrapped. But you were alive. You were warm. And you were home. Not in a house. Not yet. But with him. With them. The wild hadn't taken you. It had given something back. You stayed at the veterinary clinic for 9 days. The stitches on your side held well, though you had to wear a cone for the first few. You hated it. It bumped into walls, scraped the food bowl, and made you look ridiculous. Walter tried not to laugh. Really, he did, but his chuckles were worth the humiliation. You've been through worse, Scout, he said one morning as he scratched behind your ears. You tackled a cougar. You can survive a lampshade. The clinic was small, a 2-room outpost that served a few neighboring towns and a handful of logging crews. But the people there treated you like royalty. The young vet, Dr. Reed, said she'd never seen anything like what you'd done. I mean, a cougar? She repeated, blinking at the x-rays. And you still walked out of the forest? Walter grinned. He didn't walk out. He walked back in to save me. You couldn't explain it, but you understood the tone in his voice. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was something deeper, like awe wrapped in gratitude, like the feeling of knowing someone would run into fire for you, and realizing you'd do the same. Birch didn't leave the parking lot for 3 days. He refused to come inside. He'd curl under a pine tree near the back of the building and watch the doors, eyes sharp, tail still. The clinic staff tried to coax him in with food, blankets, even toys. Nothing worked. You whined every time they wheeled you past a window. Birch would lift his head, ears flicking forward, but he never moved. Then, On the fourth morning, Walter stepped outside with a sandwich. He sat down 10 feet away and didn't say anything. Just opened the sandwich, took a bite, and set the rest down on the grass. Then he leaned back and looked at the sky. "You know," he said aloud, "Scout doesn't trust many people. Never has. But he trusts you." A pause. "I figure that means something." Birch watched him. Quiet. Still. Walter didn't look at him again. He just closed his eyes and let the breeze move through the trees. Eventually, Birch stood. He didn't run. Didn't bark. He walked over. Took the sandwich. Sat down beside Walter. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. When the vet finally cleared you to go home, the whole clinic came to say goodbye. Dr. Reed knelt beside you, resting her hand on your chest. "Take it easy, hero. No more fights, okay?" You wagged your tail. Once. Softly. It was enough. Walter opened the back of his truck, laid down a quilt, helped you up with more care than most men use for broken glass. Birch jumped in without hesitation. The engine turned over. Gravel crunched under the tires. The road curled out ahead, golden and familiar. And just like that, you were heading home. The cabin hadn't changed much. The porch sagged a little more. The woodpile had shrunk, but the birds still came to the feeder. The sun still slid through the windows the same way in the afternoon. Walter carried you inside, even though you could walk now. Slow and stiff, but still walk. He set you down on the couch and put your favorite blanket over your hips. "You earned some softness," he said. Birch paced the cabin at first. Every room, every corner. He sniffed the bookshelves, the fireplace, the threadbare rug. He even poked his nose into the laundry basket and sneezed. Then he settled at the foot of the couch and exhaled. That was the beginning. The weeks that followed were quiet. You healed. Slowly. The fur grew back over your ribs, and the scabs on your back faded. Walter walked you in the mornings, shorter distances than before, but still enough to breathe in the pine and stretch your limbs. Birch followed along, never too close, never too far. He'd dart into the woods, chase a squirrel, and reappear at your side like a shadow with a pulse. Walter built him a bed. Not a real one, not at first. Just an old towel folded into a basket, placed in the corner. Birch never used it. He slept by the hearth, or by the front door, or, more and more often, at the end of the couch where you lay. You stopped using your old bed, too. Sometimes healing doesn't look like medicine. Sometimes it looks like sleeping side by side, paws touching in the night. One afternoon, Walter stood on the porch with a tin mug of coffee. You sat beside him, your ears twitching toward the breeze. "You know what I've been thinking?" he asked. You tilted your head. "I think we should keep him." You didn't move. "I mean, it's not like we've been overrun with visitors. And he already acts like he owns the place." From behind, Birch let out a yawn so loud it startled a bird off the railing. Walter laughed. "See what I mean?" He took another sip, then glanced down at you. "Think you could share the title of best dog I've ever known?" You licked your lips, thought about it, then leaned gently against his leg. It was a yes. A month later, Birch wandered into the backyard and lay under the oak tree for hours. You watched him from the porch, your nose lifting at something different in his scent. Not fear, not sickness. New life. It happened quietly, naturally. When Birch began to grow heavy with pups, Walter didn't say much. Just started reading more about birth and nutrition, and kept a towel-lined box near the fireplace just in case. You stayed close to her, through the long nights, through the first signs of pain, through the stormy spring evening when she gave birth to 3 pups. One black like you, one silver like her, and one with both your eyes. Walter named them Rosie, Buck, and Midge. You didn't care for the names. You just knew this. They were family. Sometimes you still wake from sleep expecting trees overhead and the smell of cougar in the air. But more often now, you wake to the sound of paws pattering across wood, the creak of Walter's chair, the smell of coffee and morning sun. You stretch, slow but steady, and you remember you survived. You protected. You came home. Time moves differently when you're content. It doesn't rush like it did in the woods, when every second mattered, when your body was counting calories and cuts and every change in the wind. Now, the days unfold in soft, deliberate motions. The creak of floorboards in the morning, Walter's kettle on the stove, Birch snoring beside the hearth, and 3 small bodies tumbling across the porch like the world had just begun. You never planned to be a father figure, not in the traditional sense. But the pups, Rosie, Buck, and Midge, followed you as if you'd invented the very idea of safety. They tugged your ears, climbed over your back, and curled up against you every evening like you were both pillow and protector. You didn't mind. Birch taught them how to hunt squirrels, how to sense the shift in air when rain was coming, how to keep their noses to the wind. But it was you they ran to when thunder rolled, or when they'd misjudged a thorn bush and returned with burrs in their fur. Walter sat on the porch most afternoons, whittling wood with a pocket knife older than the house. Sometimes he carved little animals, other times just shapes he never finished. But his hands, though shaky, moved with purpose. "They're good pups," he'd say, watching them wrestle in the grass. You'd look at him, your eyes soft, your tail giving a faint thump against the porch boards. "They remind me of someone," he'd add with a smile. He never said your name in that sentence. He didn't have to. The seasons rolled gently past. 1 year turned into 2, then 3. Winters were harder on your hips. The cold settled deep into your bones. Walter noticed before you did, adding extra blankets by the fire, heating your food slightly, lifting you onto the couch instead of asking you to jump. You didn't bark as much anymore, but you didn't need to. Birch understood your looks. The pups, now nearly grown, had developed their own language of nudges, tail flicks, and silent glances. A family without noise, but never without knowing. Walter grew slower, too. His gait shuffled more than it stepped. His voice rasped. Some days he didn't leave the porch at all. But his eyes still lit up every morning when he saw you sitting by the window. And each evening, before the sky turned gold behind the pines, he'd say, "We made it another day, Scout." You'd rest your head on his foot and let the warmth of that truth settle deep in your chest. One spring, Walter didn't come down for breakfast. You waited by the bedroom door, ears perked, listening for the sound of his slippers on the floor. Nothing. Birch joined you. So did Rosie. You pushed the door open gently with your nose. He was still in bed, peaceful, one hand curled beneath his chin. The photograph of his wife, the one he kept beside the lamp, had fallen onto his chest in the night. You stepped closer. There was no breath, no twitch, just stillness, soft, complete. You didn't whine. You didn't bark. You just climbed up beside him, rested your head where it always had gone, right against his heart. It no longer beat, but for a little while, you lay there anyway. Walter was buried near the edge of the woods, on the rise behind the cabin where he used to sit with a pair of binoculars and watch for migrating birds. The town showed up, neighbors, rangers, even Dr. Reed from the clinic. They brought flowers, shook hands, shared stories about the old man who once searched the forest for his dog and never came back empty. You stood beside the grave until the last person left. Then you lay down, not because you were waiting, but because you were remembering. You still live at the cabin. You're slower now. The pain in your back legs sometimes makes it hard to stand without help, but you don't need to chase anything anymore. You've already chased the most important things: love, loyalty, life itself. Rosie and Midge stay close. Buck wanders farther but always returns by nightfall. Birch is great around the muzzle, but her eyes are as fierce and kind as the day you met her in the woods. Every spring, the pups dig new dens near the edge of the yard. Every fall, Walter's old woodpile gets rebuilt, log by log, by the same paws that once chewed his chair legs. His legacy isn't a statue. It's a rhythm, a quiet continuity. Sometimes at night you dream, not of danger, not of the cougar's claws or the cold river, but of the truck, the wind, Walter's hand resting on your neck while he hummed an old tune, barely loud enough to hear. And sometimes when the air is still, when the stars sit close to the earth, you dream of his voice. "Well done, Scout," he says. "You did good." You wake slowly, warmth in your chest, the fire still crackling. Birch curled beside you. One of the younger dogs sprawled across your front legs. You don't rise. You don't need to. Because even now, even in the quiet of age, you know this. You never stopped being a working dog. You just changed your work. You became a guardian of memories, a keeper of love, the last living echo of a man who once believed a dog could save a soul. And he was right, because you did.